Starfighter was one of the most technologically advanced fighter planes at the start of the Second World War, and it would continue to be vital to the Japanese Navy during the entirety of the war, but towards the end, it would become less effective in its capabilities. In the years leading up to World War II, the world was in a Great Depression, and other countries had many other ways of solving this problem, like the Australians shooting emus and the Americans building massive structures like the Hoover Dam to bring jobs and stuff to people. The Japanese, on the other hand, sought to invade people to find their resources. They would invade the Chinese province of Manchuria, what is now known as the Rape of Manchuria, because they looted it for its massive amounts of resources and just people to work for them. And they also did the same to Korea. And this is where the start of the Zero really came in. The Japanese army would soon figure out that their biplanes weren't really cutting it in the skies, and they really needed an upgrade against the Chinese Air Force. That's when they reached out to the esteemed engineer Jiro Horikoshi for a design. The Japanese army was very picky in their design, though. They needed something that could go extremely far and climb to a height of 16,000 feet in under 6.5 minutes and be extremely maneuverable in any circumstance. Jiro later admitted that it was a great stress to make a fighter plane such as this in the amount of time he had. He would create what we now know as the A5M0. This fighter dominated the skies with the Chinese Air Force barely even being able to combat it in any single way possible. Through trial and error and opinions of the empire, he would create what we now know as the A6M0, which also proved itself more times than one. Before the war, Western opinions on Japan were not that good. The West felt as if Japan was more like savages and they didn't have the advanced technology or the advanced culture that the West had, and that was obviously wrong. Much of this was derived from racism, and a lot of this racism hindered the ability for the West to prepare itself properly against the Zero. The U.S. would regret this immensely after the many years that they fought the Zero and failed to come up with a strategic plane to best them for multiple years until towards the end of the war. The Zero was truly a marvel of the Japanese engineering capabilities of this time. At the start of the war, it outperformed every single other fighter plane there was available at any other country. Horikoshi was truly a master at his craft. As stated earlier, the Japanese Imperial Navy was very picky when it came to their planes. They needed something fast, extremely long-ranged, extremely maneuverable, and extremely well-armed. This would come at a great cost, though. Horikoshi was good, but he knew he could not make something so armored if it were to have all the other attributes. The fighter would be made out of a material called super duraluminum, which earlier the Hindenburg would use. And we all know how that went. It would help cut down weight exponentially, though. It would also be mounted with 7.7 millimeter machine guns and two 20 millimeter cannons, which it would use to great advantage. The Zero was so maneuverable that the U.S. had to create a new way of shooting it down. They made a new dogfighting formation called the Thatch Weave that would use two Wildcat fighters. The Zero would chase one, swoop down, and the other would shoot the Zero down. The fact that they needed two to shoot down one plane was not good odds, though. The Zero was so effective that even Allied fighters would outright avoid dogfighting it. This would go on for a while until the capture of a Japanese Zero. As said, the U.S. did end up capturing a Zero. They probed it for any weaknesses it had. One of these was obviously the material super duraluminum being so thin that the bullets would just fly straight through it. And the fact that the fuel tanks weren't self-sealing, meaning that the one shot would just end up destroying the whole plane. After seeing all the disadvantages the Zero had, the U.S. would later create the Hellcat. The Hellcat was an upgrade to the much earlier Wildcat, and it also outclassed the Zero in almost every single way except maneuverability. But this didn't seem to matter, though, because at higher altitudes it could maneuver better than the Zero could. The Japanese also knew that the Zero was on its way out, so that's why they were also trying to come with a new design. But them losing the war also led to less resources and less manpower and less pilots and less skillful pilots to start actually producing more planes. The Japanese would later fashion many Zeros into kamikaze planes, making them explode on impact. The Japanese Zero is a beautiful plane, and it was a shame that it was used in such a horrible way. It made a long-lasting impact at the start of the war, and it helped the Japanese score many wins at the start of the war. But that was only at the start, because due to the end of the war, it was more in the U.S. favor, and the Zero was, fortunately, obsolete.